Why is it so cold? What's the difference between snow grains and graupel? And signs from beyond the grave. Has anyone ever contacted you that's already left the planet?
Hello and welcome to Square Raindrop. I'm Jo Wheeler.
And I'm Steff Coulter. And actually, you're Jo Wheeler with brown hair.
I am indeed. Yeah, that was a split-second decision on Tuesday when I got an appointment at the hairdresser's anyway. And I thought, dash it all, let's have a bit of a change. And now I can officially say blondes don't necessarily have more fun. And I'm equally able to get into trouble, whatever colour my hair is.
And no one ever doubted that for a minute. I have to say, it looks really good, Jo. I like your brown. I tried it once and people said I looked much older. So that was it. We went back blonde, never looked back.
That's very harsh. Very harsh. And talking of harsh things, it's a momentous week, the inauguration of Donald Trump. Now, this is something which provokes different reactions from different people. Some are delighted and some are saying he won't be my president until hell freezes over. And by gosh, it tried.
It didn't it just? A top temperature of -4. I think that means parky on the scale of temperatures. Yeah, not very warm at all. It does get warmer later on during the week, but of course the moment has passed. I'm not surprised he decided to go inside in the end. I think I would have done as well.
I must admit, I checked the weather on the computer and the temperatures were like 24 Fahrenheit. Now, I'm really good at doing it the other way around. Celsius to Fahrenheit, not a problem. It's a breeze, do it in my sleep. But the other way about, no. I'm thinking 24. What are you talking about?
Well, the thing is, we know the common ones, so 10 and 50, 28 and 82, those kind of ones that get stuck in your head. 23, that's -4 as a top temperature. So, of course, we don't know that one. That's way too cold. Nobody wants to go that low.
There's one good reason not to live in the States. I couldn't cope with that. But having said that, living in Britain, it's been pretty chilly as well, which is weird because we've kind of had high pressure, but that's been feeding cold air from the continent. And we were offered with our forecast, not graupel, which I do understand, but snow grains, which I don't. Now, I'm going to ask the oracle here, what is the difference? And actually describe graupel to begin with, because not everybody knows that either.
Well, graupel to look at are small little white balls. It's essentially soft hail. That's what we know it as. So it's hail that you can squash with your foot. And when you see, sometimes you see on the news things like it snowed and it was 12 degrees or something. It's not snow that comes down at that temperature. 12 is way too warm for snow. That would be soft hail. It's just slightly bigger, takes longer to melt, and so it can sit there that little bit longer. Essentially, graupel is between about 2 millimeters and usually about 5 millimeters big, and they're little white balls.
And snow grains?
Snow grains are smaller. They're generally below 1 millimeter and they're more like drizzle. So they're just this bit of ice that falls out of the sky, whereas graupel is more like a snowflake that's been covered in ice on the way down.
I've never really had the time to stop and examine one, but there was something coming out of the sky the other day and I thought, oh, those must be snow grains.
If it's tiny, snow grains. If it's bigger, then probably graupel. But also graupel normally comes from a convective cloud, so it would be, a fluffy cloud, as it were. Whereas graupel has to come from a flat cloud, like it's drizzle, essentially, in icy form.
Now, I feel like I'm asking you to explain yourself today. But on the forecast the other day, you were talking about it was a diffluent block, not a confluent high, as I thought. Diffluent block. What is the difference between a diffluent block and your common or garden standard high pressure?
So high pressures, generally I call them large flabby things that don't like to move anywhere in a great hurry. They're couch potatoes. They sit over one place for a while, but they do generally move a little bit. When you get a block, you kind of get this low pressure, high pressure combination that kind of locks it into place and makes that high pressure move even slower than it normally would. Now, you can get a block in the shape of an omega, the Greek letter omega, with two low pressures here and the high in the middle. Or you can get a diffluent block, which is when the high pressure is in the north, the low pressure is in the south, and due to the way the winds go round, it kind of stays in place. Weather coming along can't get through it, so it has to go around it, either to the north or to the south.
And on this particular occasion, it took a storm into the central Mediterranean.
The low pressure from that diffluent block, yeah, was over the Mediterranean and sat there for a while. So they had some pretty horrible weather. Whereas elsewhere across Europe, under the high pressure, it was all quite quiet.
Now, that storm has sort of died out in situ. And if you're heading to Italy or to Greece over the next few days, it's actually not looking too bad at all. If you're heading to Portugal, not quite so good.
No, a little bit hairy there. Yes, they have a low pressure heading their way. And tell us about it, Joe.
Well, it is a very deep area of low pressure. It's going to bring some heavy rain and strong winds. And it's a named storm as well. And I have to confess, even having lived in Portugal for almost 10 years, I don't know how to say this. It's spelt Geore. So it could be Gehor.
I have no idea. Portuguese and me are not friends. I could, it looks like, when I've written it down, it looks like the Portuguese version of George, but the second G's disappeared. So it's like George without the second G. But in Spanish, which I do understand a bit more, that would be more like Jorge, but that would have a G in it.
Now, one of my daughters is passionate about all things Spanish. Unfortunately, her name is Georgia. So her name in Spanish is Chopia. Chopia. Makes her sound like a donkey.
Yeah, a little bit, but maybe she could use her middle name. Maybe she could. Yes.
So this big storm coming into Portugal is going to head up towards us as well. In fact, we're looking at rather a spell of lively weather.
Yes, so the beginning of this week, dull. I mean, literally dull, it's cloudy. But a few breaks are expected later on, here and there, if you're lucky. But as we head towards the end of the week, then things get more lively. And of course, when weather people say more lively, they mean worse, usually. So wind, rain, and all of that good stuff. Although it might get a little bit milder, which I would certainly enjoy.
And this is partly to do with the jet stream, which obviously is picking up because of that temperature differential over the States. Because they're talking about flights from the States to the UK next week, not taking very long at all. Won't matter if you set off a few minutes late, you're going to get here earlier anyhow. Winds of up to around 150 kilometres per hour, I guess, maybe miles per hour. What do they use in the States? And that really is going to whip things up nicely.
Usually when something big comes out of the States, it buckles that jet stream so that then it kind of flips down and that would push weather our way, maybe a bit further south than it normally would. So that's kind of normally the impact of a big flick of the jet stream over from the States.
So if you happen to be at home this weekend, no particular place to go because the weather's too hairy to go out, maybe a good ghost story, because sadly for you, Steph, your dad died before Christmas, and we did say we were going to talk about it, but you've had some rather comforting signs.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about it at the time, but I knew that I would just cry. So that wouldn't make a very good podcast at all with, 20 minutes of me sobbing into the microphone. So now I can talk about it without that happening. All is good. So I found when my mum died, there were a couple of signs that showed she was still around, which were just weird because she clearly wasn't. But the big one was when I was pregnant with my second child, a particular stamp that I had bought because of my mother. It was, anyway, a particular stamp that I always kept in a particular drawer, in a particular place, way away. I found it on the middle of my bed, just when I was about to take my pregnancy test. So I knew that my mum was telling me that I was pregnant. So it's a weird thing because nobody else knew anything about the stamp. Nobody else knew where it was. Nobody had touched it. Everything else was untouched. So it's just that weird kind of like, I'm sure there is a rational explanation, but it's the timing that is the weird thing. So when my mum went, apparently, and I don't remember this because my first child was 5 weeks old and hormones were everywhere and I was a bit of a hot mess, shall we say. I put a flower from her funeral thingy, in a book and flattened it. And it stayed there and I forgot all about it. My dad died and my sister said, "Oh, I've still got the flower from my mum's that you gave me." And I went, "What flower?" So she showed me this picture of this flower and I was like, "Oh, I don't remember anything about it. I wish I had one. I don't. That's a shame, but there we go." I lived in Doha at the time, so it would probably got smashed on the way over there anyway. At the same time, randomly, Felipe found 4 or 5 books at the back of a wardrobe. Goodness knows why I was looking at the back of the wardrobe. Anyway, so he pulled them out and he went, "Oh, one of them's a kid's book. It's Harry Potter, massive, great big thing. Maybe our oldest child would like it." So I gave it to him, and Milo opened it and he goes, Mummy, there's a flower in here. And it was the flower from my mum's funeral. And I found it just that it had been in that cupboard, in that book, for 10 years. Nobody had looked at it. Nobody knew that it was there. And then suddenly, 3 days before my dad's funeral, it shows up. It's the timing. The timing's weird.
That it really is strange that. Now, of course, what we do is pretty much science based. So we should be the last people to actually think that this happens. But when you talk about flowers, I had a very similar situation when my mum died, that I was going from Lincolnshire across to Cheshire, where she was. And before I set off, I cut 2 or 3 flowers from the garden, roses, that had only just come out. And I travelled up, couldn't smell them in the car, forgot to pick them up and take them in with me. But when I left that night at about 11:30, I saw them in the back of the car and I thought, I'll take them inside. Now, these were COVID times. So going back in to the nursing home she was in, it was full PPE again, temperature, mask, in and out. So I went running along the corridors, went into the room, found a coffee cup to put them in. That was the only thing I got. Put them next to the bed. And I thought, if she does open her eyes, she'll smell them, she'll see them. That would be lovely. And the following morning, I turned up and the smell of these roses hit me from about 12 foot outside the room. The smell was overwhelming. I really can't tell you. And I arrived literally 2 or 3 minutes before she died. And the smell of those roses woke me up every morning for the next 6 months when I came back home. And even more bizarrely, it was the first thing I could smell in the morning. And the other thing is that rose bush has always come into bloom within 2 days of the day that she died.
It's funny, isn't it? Because, like you, I don't necessarily want to believe because my scientific brain doesn't like it. But there are undeniable signs that, there's something else going on. But in your other life, Jo, you're a celebrant, aren't you?
I am, yes. So I do come across these thoughts quite often, and things that people say have happened. I have to say, I'm that interested in the afterlife that on my Christmas list and received, thank you very much, children, was Neil Oliver's book, Hauntings, which was absolutely amazing. He's got some great stories to tell, and some of those are historical. But just to finish on a bit of a lighter note, after my dad died, which was back in 2010, he had a great sense of humour, he did. And at the time I was working at Sky down in London, and my shift pattern was not particularly routine. I'd turn up on the odd day here, maybe not turn up again for another 10 days. But we had this huge office with an enormous window. And so I turn up soon after he's died, and this crow comes and sits on the window. But this was no ordinary crow. This was a crow that had no trousers on. Now, you might say, most crows don't wear trousers. But what I mean here is the fact he got no feathers from the waist down, which made him very identifiable, I have to say. So we had a giggle at this crow that was hopping along the thing, the window ledge, tapping on the window. But he continued to turn up every time I turned up, and never at any other time.
How
And I'm
funny.
sure it was my dad. Sure it was my dad having a bit of
Your
a
dad with
laugh.
no trousers. Well, I hope you had words, Jo.
He wasn't named for that, honest and true. But listen, how about you test us out as scientists? If you've got stories of signs from the afterlife, things that have given you comfort after a loved one has passed away. Well, certainly I'd love to know, because as you say, that's part of my other job. But I'm sure you'd like to know too, Steffi.
Yeah, it just brings a lot of comfort at this time when you've just lost someone to know that actually they're not very far away.